I would like to report that today we did receive our CARES funding disbursement, $483,169. The deposit was made, and the treasurer of the city of Covington did validate that the funds were transferred to our account. So again, that's $483,169. Wanted to just do a brief discussion with you all, or more so briefing rather, on the CARES funding, what CARES is intended for. So the $483,000, it's eligible for those expenses to the direct response to the pandemic, which does include public health needs and second order effects, such as business disruption funding, other economic support to those impacted economically, offsetting our operational costs and needs to respond, adapting business processes, those kinds of things. There is specific federal guidelines that prohibits this use for any offsetting of revenue or losses incurred, or anything trying to offset what you've programmed in your budget. So these are unplanned budgetary expenses and needs. You could probably just turn mine off. I'll be good. I'm good. Actually really low. Is that me? Okay, good. Then I'm low, so I'm good. So as a locality, we're going to be closely monitoring all of our COVID-19 related expenditures, which we have been doing since the latter part of February, early March, when we started ramping up with some, disinfectants and those kinds of things. As many of the expenses that we actually already incurred will be eligible for reimbursement under CARES. Some of those examples: the overtime costs for public health, public safety positions responding to the public health emergency, financial support to offset the telework expenses we incurred with the technology, the costs related to higher frequency or more specialized cleaning and disinfecting of facilities, facility and workspace modifications, and increased assistance that we may find that we need to disperse to the organizations that we fund. So potentially, once we try to address some of the immediate need within the city and reimbursing the costs and adapting business processes, if there's funds left over, there's the ability to potentially provide those to some nonprofits, whether that's, for instance, the Southwest Virginia Food Bank or some local food pantries if they're registered as nonprofits. Those type of options are available. So there are very specific restrictions. As I had mentioned before, nothing for revenue, nothing to create new positions that aren't necessarily tied directly to COVID. So if, let's just say, we started having a huge uptick with EMS and we had to have some more public health assistance, we could do that, as well as using overtime in the response effort. As far as for what we're considering to use CARES funds for here in the city at this point in time, we've, from a high level, discussed operational needs required for adapting business processes due to COVID-19. That can range anywhere from plexiglass to modifications to actual work areas, and we're looking at that. Enhanced facility sanitation efforts, telework expenses, cleaning and disinfectant supplies, facility and building modifications needed due to protecting sites, employees, and the public we serve. Perfect example is we've talked about installing some customer service windows, not just for development services, but potentially for the Parks and Recreation office here in City Hall, as well as the city manager's office, having a customer service window where then no one's actually coming into the office suite area, you're serving them at a window. That's something we're exploring, as well as some other needs. PPE, continuing to try to get our hands on as much of that as we can, and meeting other various public safety needs regarding gear necessary to protect first responders. Sorry, I feel like I'm going to sneeze. Modifications necessary for operations related to health and safety of communal work areas, restrooms, touch surfaces. One big thing we're looking at is the motion sensor lights. So that's one surface that you're not touching. Trying to get more just motion sensor or different style activated water fountains, things like that. And we'll assess city-funded organizations' needs as well. So that is what I have regarding CARES funding for you all. And again, we did receive the funding, so we can now start to at least reimburse ourselves One big cost that we had incurred with COVID-19 that is not a FEMA reimbursable cost was the telework cost that we had with trying to gear up folks with laptops, mobile hotspots, those kind of things, or printers or scanners at their home. That is eligible for reimbursement under CARES funding, so that's a huge relief for us. So beyond that, are there any questions? The money has to be spent by December 30th. As I mentioned, we could choose to try to administer some of the funds to nonprofits, or potentially through, grants or support to the business community, potentially through the EDC as well.
So along those lines, I know we've applied for 1.5 million.
Yes, sir.
Along with Allegheny County
and
Clifton Forge, and that money would be used to offset anything that's happened with businesses through a grant process.
Businesses and nonprofits.
Okay. So we've got 2 businesses on Main Street and then another business on the road that were in the process of preparing to open. Mm-hmm. None of the 3 got open. Mm-hmm. The money that we're talking about, the 1.5, has to be an existing business, not someone that's preparing to open business. Is that right?
As it stands now, because the logic that the EDC has used for the USDA program of the microloans of the 1,500 was that it was an existing business of at least 12 months and 20 or fewer employees. So the logic was that, if and when and whatever funding amount we receive, if it's up to the 1.5 or it's less, what we would receive, we would use the same model, since we developed evaluation criteria and an application form and everything around it. That is what Mr. Lanford, Ms. Bersham, and myself have recommended to the EDC, that would be the easiest way to go with it.
So the 3 businesses, and those are 3 I know of. I'm not sure about any others, but all 3 of those businesses have made significant investment. Mm-hmm. And they've not even been able to work on preparing to open for the last 3 months.
Understood.
So I would hope we could figure out a way to help them somehow. Mm-hmm. with the process that they're in. Mm-hmm. I think we should look for some way to aid them, and all 3 of them, as far as I know, are still intending to open.
Yes, they are.
But they're 3 months behind, and they have taken money and invested into these places, and they're not getting any return whatsoever, and Absolutely. They're not available for the grants so far.
What I will say is, the one thing that I would urge council to be understanding and mindful of is there is a lot of upcoming legislation that will likely impact us as a workplace and employer, with some more overarching measures of what we have to do regarding COVID-19 and other things, and us trying to work primarily first through the adaptations and needs that we have for outfitting things for staff, for operations, because there's going to be an increased cost for, our simple, more routine functions, even as the city pool opens, as we open playgrounds, for the level of sanitation that's required for those, the overtime, the chemicals, all of those kinds of things, or buying the products to disperse the chemicals, or the disinfectants rather, not chemicals, that is a completely different connotation. So I think that one thing that we were doing now, and we've started this internally, we developed a tracking sheet, and we've asked each department head to outline any known adaptations they know they need, to whether it's, partitions, or they need, some improved work spread out space, those kinds of things, and trying to get an idea of what those are, to then figure out what we need from out the gate with that, and then go from there, if that makes sense. So making sure that we're first protecting the facilities that we're going to have to open to the public, as well as the facilities that we have operational for our staff to come into every day and do their work, and then work our way out from that. I know that's not ideal, but I would caution, we do have to also use some of the money to offset expenses already related to COVID.
Right.
Perfect example was for the remote work capabilities that most all of our admins engaged in for about a little over 4 weeks. That cost $16,000. So it's $483,000. I do think, without absolute confidence though, there should be funds available. There should be something that we can then contribute to the EDC to then roll into the emergency funding or the USDA program. I just am not in a position, nor is our finance and administration, to project or speculate at this time. We just got the dollars today, but I understand that that would be a wish of council's.
Be a wish of mine. The rest of council, whatever they think. I think that we need to be mindful that those people are making a significant investment. All three are making a significant investment. It's not just a drop in the bucket.
No, it's not.
Okay. Any of y'all got any questions or concerns? And then the school got money on top of this one.
Yes. The school has its own separate pot of money. It's a little over $200,000, and it is for COVID-related expenses. So while I will say that, we could do a business program for our small businesses, it would be for adaptations or things related to COVID. So it would not be to offset their revenue, to continue planned construction. It would be if they realized they had to have certain style, instead of having wood tables, they realized they needed to get the antimicrobial surface tables or those kinds of things. It wouldn't be to offset potential loss of investment, if that makes sense in any way.
It does.
And also too, I will say is I will continue to keep council apprised of the evolving guidelines around CARES funding. Because again, this was something that literally was announced maybe 3.5, 4 weeks ago. We just got the funds today. We've received to date an advisory memo from our city attorney, and we've also received some documents that have been provided to other localities through our municipal advisors. But there's not a lot of concrete guidelines. So it seems like you can almost do anything, but then you really can't. So but we will work to engage in looking into more of the restrictions or the uses for the small business aspect and figuring out what costs. Because even if we're just able to assist them with whether it's a certain style cash register or a partition at a cash register or those kinds of things, that still helps.
But the DHCD money won't have any restrictions.
No, DHCD money will not. That will be to keep the business afloat.
So we can look at how
to encourage folks to then use that for the business need versus the money that the city may be able to provide for your COVID needs. So if you need to have masks or gloves or certain other things, whether it's masks for walking customers or masks for your employees while they're working in the kitchen or those kinds of things, or any sort of modifications that have to be done specifically for COVID. Because that's the same restrictions that the local governments and nonprofits have. So if they had to do increased sanitation, so maybe they decide they want to have instead of having someone that splits their duty between dishwashing and custodial work, if they're doing someone full-time custodian, that could potentially be an eligible reimbursement. But I don't want to bore you all.
Y'all okay with all that? No question? Yes.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
I understand that this is to be a public hearing that needs to be added for next week. It was advertised today.
Yes.
So it will be needed to add it as a public hearing for next week.
Because the dollar value of the CARES funding is more than 1% of our budget, we do have to do a public hearing to accept the funds. So that was advertised with the budget hearing notice. We did them simultaneously. We discussed that last week, and my apologies for not catching that on the agenda to add that. Thank you, Gail.